Please start.
Good morning, Senator Millett, and all of you distinguished persons. I'm amazed that you go so late. I forgot my name. I'm so tired. I am here in opposition to LD 798. I'm not against vaccines, but I am against this bill. I heard a phrase here today very often repeated, and that was "for the common good." And I tell you, every time I heard that phrase, the hair on my head stood up, and let me explain why. I was born under communism in Czechoslovakia, in a totalitarian country. History seems to have been rewritten in this country so that communism isn't so bad, but I grew up in it, and it is bad. We had a border which was to keep people in. We had several family friends that died at the border trying to escape the common good. Common good sounds good, but it really is overreaching in its implications. My parents defected from that communist country. They risked their own lives and their children's, and unlike many, they made it out alive. This was what they were willing to do for the sake of freedom, and they left everything behind. Since that time, I have watched with sadness as our entire country here in the U.S. has become a land where life is no longer as it should be. Governments at the federal and state levels have produced more freedom-restricting laws that negate the very Constitution on which this country was founded. A Constitution which was forged from the experiences of suffering from many peoples from many countries of oppression. I will tell you from personal experience, I would rather die from a disease than die from the oppression under an oppressive government. And this is a slippery slope in which our country, not just related to this specific bill, but in general, our country has embarked on a slippery slope to take away personal freedom. I'm not a medical professional, but I would only remind this body that the safety and efficacy of vaccines is not a slam dunk science as some of the previous witnesses have implied. I am stunned at the fact that nobody has brought up European countries. Has anybody looked at the CDC equivalent of France, Germany, the UK, Netherlands, Denmark? They all have variations on what they claim to be the proper use of vaccines. They have different rules as to what can and cannot be included in vaccines. Some outlaw mercury and aluminum, for example. It is not a slam dunk science. There's much disagreement if you look outside of the United States. And I think it would be entirely arrogant for America to think that we're the smartest. I would urge you to vote against this. It is at its base level an issue of freedom, and we need to be free if life is worth living. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any questions?
I see none. Thank you. So David Tannhauser, Alan Imes, Michael Cunningham, Alice Ingalls, Terry Hutchinson, Cynthia O'Donnell, please come forward. Alan, David?
I'm pretty sure that Dr. Tannhauser has left.
Okay. Alan Imes?
Yes. I get rid of 95% of my testimony. Good morning, good evening, and what day is it? I forgot. Senator Millett and the distinguished members of the Educational and Cultural Commission, Affairs Committee, thank you for being here still and having a good attitude. I really appreciate about there's a couple statisticians tonight, there's a couple of critical thinkers tonight, there's a lot of doctors, a lot of nurses. I'm a pastor. My name is Alan. My name is Alan Imes. I live in Waterville, 22 years pastoring. So it's interesting that very few, almost everybody here played well tonight, and I appreciate that. Senator Millett had to get a couple in line, but other than that, it was very, very good. So for the sake of time, and 98% of what I was going to say was already said, and Senator Millett said you should not be redundant, even though about 75% of the people were redundant tonight. I'll try not to be redundant. So I'll do this. I am opposed to it. I'm opposed to LD 798, and I ask you to consider opposing that also. So I'll do it this way. I'll ask a couple of questions. In regards to the Constitution, in regards to the choice, in regards to all that stuff, you have to think about that. And I will pray that God gives you wisdom, because this is a tricky and a very thin-iced presentation as far as this bill. Be very, very careful your decision. So I'll pray that you make the right decision. At the end of the day, your decision is going to hold some strong validity one way or another. So I'll ask a couple of questions. What are you, I was thinking about this, we have some independent Mainers that spoke tonight. We really do. We have some that appear, as you're saying, Senator Matthew, we have doctors, we have nurses on one side of the spectrum, on the other side of the spectrum. We have attorneys on one side of the spectrum and on the other side of the spectrum. We have everybody in between. But I did the math, approximately 70% oppose, at least that are here tonight. I know the one gentleman thought that 92% of the silenced individuals, I'm not sure why they didn't come out, too bad, but those that came out, we appreciate. So let me ask you a couple questions. What are you going to do if this bill passes, if it's a yes, and this bill passes? What are you going to do with the healthcare workers, the healthcare professionals that do not want to work with the YES program? What are you going to do with them? You're going to get rid of them? You're going to get rid of their jobs? You're going to send them down the tubes? You're going to put them in jail? I'm just asking a question. Being serious about this. What are you going to do with the students? Parents don't want to get them vaccinated. Are they going to literally be out of school? Are they going to have no contact with any of their peers at the playground, after school programs or anything? What are you going to do? It's a very serious situation. So this is not just, I think the bill was presented from a person that really had a good heart, and that means that my heart is about stopping, because that time is done. I had a lot more questions, but guys, I can go to bed now. Thank you so much. I'm going to sleep. Have a great night. Thank you guys for everything.
Good night. Michael Cunningham?
Oh, unless you have any questions, of course.
There.
Senator Matthew, I can't believe it. See you guys.
Oh, good morning. Yeah.
Alice, Ingalls, Terry, Hutchinson, Cynthia ODonnell, and Julie Eaton, if you could come to the front.
In the famous words of Michael Shepard, good morning from Augusta. I don't envy your position, although I can kind of remember it at one point or another. Thank you for having me here. So, greetings, Senator Millett and Representative Cornfield. Good evening, good morning, and all other salutations to distinguished members of the Educational and Cultural Affairs Committee. It's nice to see you again, Senator Pouliot, Senator Millett, Representative Sampson, Representative Dodge, and congratulations on your re-elections and first-time elections. My name is Michael Cunningham, and I'm a resident of Portland, Maine. Although I was just living in Belfast not too long ago. I'm actually a grandchild of the professional grandma that was up here earlier, so that makes me like a Mainer to the Googleplex. I'd like to take a moment to introduce you to my girlfriend, Laura. She's a wonderful woman, and we hope to start a family here in Maine someday. Meeting Laura changed my life in the better in so many ways. One of the reasons why my life began to get better is I started to take a look in areas in my life that I needed to improve. Out of a desire to be the best that I really could be for her and the kids I hope to have with her someday. Naturally, health became a question. I have been through a lot. When I was 18, I left Maine to go to college in Houston. Before I knew it, a year after that, I was in the Army, and a year after that, I was deployed to the most deadly place in the world, according to CNN and other news stations, which they dubbed the Valley of Death. While it made for good movies and certainly brought meaning to the Lord's Prayer, the resulting health issues were enormous. I started to go through them to get a grip on what I might be up against for the rest of my life. At first, it seemed fairly straightforward. Post-traumatic stress disorder, you can't have a conversation about war without inevitably talking about that. After witnessing an incident at a mental health clinic in which a soldier's reaction to pharmaceutical drugs for PTSD left him unable to control his hands, literally twisting into a crippled mess, I decided that maybe it would be smart to stay as close to natural as I could. There didn't appear to be many, if any, side effects from talk therapy, vitamins, exercise, equine therapy, meditation, or things like it. Where I started to become worried, though, is when I wondered about more things than just PTSD. I started to wonder what were the possible risks for all the concussive blasts I sustained, the exposure to burn pits, even depleted uranium in the sable rounds we fired and the bombs that we dropped. One of those 500-pound GBU bombs was dropped no more than 200 meters away from me. A giant shard on fire sunk into the ground next to me. It became more and more clear that these things I experienced could possibly have long-lasting, enduring effects on my health, and it's possible many of them have yet to manifest. Throughout this research, I came across possibly the most disconcerting piece of information so far. Mefloquine, a pharmaceutical drug manufactured under the brand name Larian, has caused severe psychological issues in soldiers. The drug, now affectionately referred to as the Army's suicide pill, was responsible for causing psychosis, delirium, insomnia, but more interestingly mimicked the symptoms of PTSD, such as anger, depression, anxiety, and of course suicide. 2 weeks before we were to fly to Afghanistan and started weekly doses of mefloquine Mondays, for me, this lasted into my first week in Afghanistan. It was then I experienced the first side effect of the drug. The medical staff said it would be the side effects of very bad dreams. I had a dream I had to carry my friend down the mountain in a rucksack because he was in pieces. I never forgot that dream. It was quite vivid, unlike anything I've ever had. Now reading 10 years later, they're finding out new things about the drugs. Its side effects can be permanent, lay dormant, and then come on suddenly. So what does all this have to do with the bill we are here today? Roche, the company that manufactures Lariam or mefloquine, also makes vaccines. I never consider myself to be anti-vaccine, but after these experiences, I consider myself to be very much in favor of informed consent. And I'm very much against government-mandated medical procedures on any level. I avoid taking pharmaceutical drugs as much as I can. The reasons being are because I have seen time and time again impossible to predict what may happen years and years down the line. It's puzzling to me that this bill is before the committee. Maine is consistently ranked highest in the nation for childhood vaccination rates, even with these exemptions. I am concerned about being in a situation as a free person not under contract with the U.S. government anymore, where me or my children will be forced to take pharmaceutical drugs or undergo medical procedures that I may not agree with. Here we are debating this when politicians have told me all the while that I fought for the right to live freely, so that I should have the right to do just that. I would like to live in Maine, my home state, the state where I was born and raised, continue to finish school, start a family undisturbed without being forced to participate in a medical procedure that I feel is not in my family's best interest. I know what it's like to take pharmaceuticals against your will when you know there's serious potential risk. I told myself that if I survived war and made it back home to Maine, a place where I would never have to be in that situation again, I urge you to vote in opposition to this bill in order to preserve the liberties that I fought for, which this state is so famous for upholding. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Cunningham, for your service and for coming here tonight. Are there any questions?
It's wonderful to see you all again. Thank you.
Alice Ingalls? Terry Hutchinson?
Hello. I want to apologize. I don't have written testimony
okay.
tonight. I've been struggling all day. I do want to read a little bit of something. I'll try to be quick. I want to thank you for being open to stay until now. I'm not going to speak to the science tonight. I feel that's been covered thoroughly, although sometimes inaccurately. So I do really hope that during the work session you will dive into the research some more and really look into both of those conflicting things that you've found tonight. The fact is the science is not settled, and that's exactly the point. We don't know, and there's too many questions. Tonight, my concern is the future of my family, in particular my 15-year-old freshman who was with me for 8 hours earlier today, but I had to take him and my 5-year-old home to Auburn to pick up my husband from his college midterm exam and get them to bed. I drove back here in about 20 to 30 feet visibility in the storm from Auburn because I feel so strongly opposed to LD 798. If this bill passes, my son, who I wanted to homeschool, but who has had so many developmental delays that it was decided it would be more beneficial to obtain an IEP to receive services and therapies at school, beginning in a specialized preschool for those with similar roadblocks, would have to leave his school. What I didn't know then, nor until he was fully vaccinated until age 8, is that his struggles could have been caused by his childhood vaccines. Now, if this passes, he will be taken out of school, unable to graduate with those children he has been with since he was 3 years old, over a single vaccine. One. He's only missing one. Additionally, my husband, who I mentioned, just started school in August. He left school in 1988. He hasn't been back in 30 years, and he decided to go back in August to be a substance abuse counselor because they're so needed in our state. He has a seizure disorder, and he tried to get a medical exemption, but he was denied because there was lack of evidence. He didn't have an anaphylactic shock, and so they couldn't prove that his issues are caused by those or other medications, and he gets seizures from them. Because of that, we rely on philosophical exemptions. If those are taken away, as I said, my son will not be able to graduate, and my husband might not even be able to continue school that he just started. He's getting a 3.86 GPA right now. He's doing really well, and he's going to have to give up on his dream if these exemptions are taken away. And that's all I had to say. Please don't take them away.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Cynthia ODonnell?
Yes.
Julie Eaton, Eric Barbalius, Jim King, and Megan Nathanson. Cynthia,
Yes,
welcome.
thank you for sticking around. These are my concerns regarding LD 798. For one, the first principle of the Nuremberg Code states that the voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential, and that's the big thing I think that we're discussing here. Number two, an effective vaccine does not necessarily mean a protective vaccine. Effective means that an antibody has been formed, but as you've heard through other testimony, sometimes 30 to 90% of the people who contract a disease have been immunized. So where is the protection? Effective does not mean protective. Number three, unvaccinated children are more healthy than vaccinated children over the long run. Back in 1984, one of my favorite pediatricians, he was a pediatrician for 40 years, he wrote this, and I think it's prophetic. There is a growing suspicion that immunization against relatively harmless childhood diseases may be responsible for the dramatic increase in autoimmune diseases since mass inoculations were introduced. And he goes on to list some pretty scary things. A recent study in 2017 compared vaccinated and unvaccinated children, and this was the conclusion. The apparent dose-response relationship between vaccination status and several forms of chronic illness, and the significant association between vaccination and NDDs, which is neurodevelopmental disorders like ADD, ADHD, ASD, all support the possibility that some aspect of the current vaccination program could be contributing to risks of childhood morbidity. Whoa. Did you know that this is the first generation of children whose life expectancy is projected to be less than their parents? Why? That's scary. I'm a midwife, and I'm not proud of the infant mortality rate in our country. There are 30-something different countries all over the world that do health better than we do. I have books in my reference libraries that suggest a strong correlation between infant vaccines and SIDS. I'm sure our health problems are multifactorial, but consider for a moment that one factor may be related to our vaccine system. Just keep an open mind, because like many others have testified, this science is not exact, and this is looked by some as a long-term experiment.
Thank you very much. Julie Eaton? Eric? Barbalius?
My name is Eric Barbalius of Glenburn, and I oppose LD 798. Just because I have informed and reasonable questions and concerns does not make me anti-vaccine. I am against those who think safety and public moral obligation translate into forcibly injecting anyone regardless of their objections. Their strategy has become to label dissenters as sources of misinformation or menaces to a fictitious disease-free society, and yet such zeal that shouts louder and louder has never honestly addressed a single concern or objection. Such an ultra-pro-vaccine mantra is hostile and unresponsive to pervasive warning signs and shamefully all too willing to sacrifice true faith, safety, evidence-based best practice, justice, free speech, parental rights, and informed consent, all in the name for the greater good, the supposed greater good. Let's stop slandering anti-vaxxers. Instead, let's call out those who are anti-informed consent. Rather than assuming any objection or concern is irrational, it could never actually be based in reality. Instead, let's honestly ask this question: why do parents really object? And also, why is there growing strain between patients and their healthcare providers? Don't be deceived by the thought that all dissent is due to supposed ignorance. People can see through the smokescreen that claims inferior education among dissenters is all that needs to be corrected in order to eradicate vaccine hesitancy. Concluding we need a better education system is far too simplistic of an answer and insults the sovereignty and good sense of us all. Unless those who espouse that silver bullet of education are willing to honestly educate themselves with vaccine package inserts, scientific papers, parental testimonials, clinical presentations, and the influence of heavy pharmaceutical lobbying and taxpayer-funded vaccine injury compensation. Or perhaps what's actually meant by some when they call for better education systems, that they really wish they had a more totalitarian propaganda machine that is better at conditioning 100% of the masses to abandon critical thinking and yielding without question to government medical practice. There are multifaceted biblical objections to state-mandated vaccines that are related to the following, and I have scripture references included here. Number one, abortion-generated vaccines and the absolute conviction to abstain from them. Number two, protecting the vulnerable from what is unsafe and ineffective. Number three, speaking against corruption, censorship, and obstruction of justice. Four, asserting the divine parental calling. And five, refusing to abort informed consent, holding the line against medical dehumanization and spiritual adultery. Ultimate spiritual soul and body healing is only in Christ's cross and resurrection, and he's here with us tonight. Be warned that the removal of our rights is leading somewhere, to the darkest place in the night of human history, as prophesied in the Bible. Yet I long for the sunrise return of Christ, and I'll do what I can to stand for him. I ask you to stand for the protection of the vulnerable, religious liberty, free speech, justice, parental rights, and informed consent. Please vote against LD 798. Thank you.
Thank you. Quinn Thompson, Stephen Schran, if you could come in. Jen Barbalius.
Good morning. My name is Jen Barbalius. I'm a resident of Glenburn. I request that you oppose LD 798. As a mother, I have been given my children as a gift from God. He has given me the ability to care and make educated choices for their health care. The proposed bill of 798 will take away my rights to make these choices and put them in the hands of people that do not know or love my children individually like I do. This bill will force me to place my trust in humans who will introduce new vaccines to the CDC schedule without my consent and into my children's bodies. As a registered nurse, newly registered nurse in the NICU, I'm an advocate for patients practicing informed consent. In nursing school, all nurses are taught to be a respecter of patients who have the right to make their own decisions. As a nurse, I have recently heard a parent's testimony that suspects vaccine injury of a child and the scoffing of the doctors who refuse to acknowledge that possibility. They didn't even suggest VAERS to her. This bill will remove school choice from the parents and their children, not allowing them to participate in a school they love and not allowing them to earn a college degree in the state of Maine, is coercing families to choose between education or vaccination. This also will affect employment during this time of a nursing shortage. I'm one of those healthcare workers that would not qualify to stay where I'm at. This bill will work to legislate discrimination upon those who claim religious exemption, and for me, it will be driving me out of Maine and my family.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Stephen Schran, Charlotte Iserbite, Kathleen Shostek, and Robin Smith, if you would come forward. Jim King. Megan Nathanson. Jennifer Merriam. Quinn Thompson.
Senator Millett, and distinguished members of the Education and Cultural Affairs Committee. My name is Quinn Thompson. I'm 14 and reside in Bodenham. I request you vote to oppose LD 798. When I was 6 months old, I experienced a vaccine adverse reaction that left my parents scrambling to figure out what was happening to me. For the next 6 months, I banged my head so severely and repeatedly that I had bruises on my forehead all the time. My mom was extremely disturbed by this behavior and worried that I would suffer further injury. My parents stopped vaccinating and detoxed me. Slowly, I stopped headbanging. Today, I am recovered, but because I am susceptible to vaccine injury, I cannot be vaccinated again. My vaccine injury happened when we were living in Rhode Island. We moved back to Maine when I was 11 months old. We will never qualify for a medical exemption under Maine's present narrow guidelines. If this bill passes, I will not be able to attend a Maine college. My plan was to enroll in a community college in the next year or two. I am homeschooled and was hoping to receive my associate's degree while still in high school. Following, I wanted to transfer to a university where I could pursue a degree in mechanical engineering. I will need to move out of state, and because I experienced a vaccine adverse reaction, I will be forced to pay more for a degree. How's that fair? It seems to me Maine will experience a huge loss in revenue if students are forced out of the school system, either because they are injured and do not qualify for a medical exemption, or because their family's values and health goals. If college students are forced out of Maine and gain a degree elsewhere, the chances of these students marrying and settling in other states is high. This is not just a short-term revenue loss for Maine. This could have long-term consequences for Maine's economy. I would ask you to please support my basic human rights to decide what happens to and goes into my body. Please do not marginalize children for injuries they have suffered. Let us succeed here in Maine, where we can grow up to be contributing members to our community. Please vote to oppose LD 798 and instead approve LD 9 87. Thank you for your time.
Quinn, thank you for hanging in there. Okay, Robin Smith, Renee McHugh, Valerie McHugh, Ryan Gagnon, Rebecca Miller, Dean DeWitt, Joshua Pives, oh my lord. If there's no Joshua around, I'm just going to go with that. For Joshua from Peru. Okay, nope. Jacqueline Dubois. Margaret from Phillips. Karen Hood. Stephen Cates. Regina we've had. Laura Diane. Muller from Owl's Head. Marta Howard. Karen Harrington. And I've got a winner. I'm going to read a couple more names. Dorinda Weeks, Lindsey Atkinson, Edith Dunham, Julia Dawson. Okay, please proceed.
Did you say I could go?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. Senator Millett and distinguished members of the Education and Cultural Affairs Committee, my name is Karen Harrington, and I live in Clinton. I've been a registered nurse here in Maine for 14 years. I'm also a mother of 4. I request that you vote against LD 798 and instead for LD 987. I began my nursing career very enthusiastic about vaccines. I'm fully vaccinated. My first child was fully vaccinated. However, for reasons too complex to discuss in just 3 minutes, I decided to selectively vaccinate my other children. I made an educational decision to leave out vaccines I decided were unnecessary or that I never received myself, such as the varicella vaccine. Other countries agree with me on this, as the varicella vaccine is not part of childhood schedules in many other countries, including the UK. In fact, the US has the most required vaccines of all the developed nations, and coincidentally, the highest infant mortality rate of those nations. I'm afraid of how this will affect my family. 3 of my 4 children will not be allowed in school. We will have to homeschool or leave the state. Maine has been my home my whole life. I can't imagine leaving. I'm the primary wage earner in our home, and all our family's health insurance is through my job as a nurse. There's no way I can homeschool my kids and still work full-time. Plus, I'm also in school pursuing higher education, pulling a 4.0, by the way. So sadly, we're considering moving if this bill passes, which is devastating. But I've worked at the same hospital my entire nursing career, and the thought of leaving a job I love as an OB nurse, which is the best job in the world, devastates me. I'm not the only nurse contemplating a move out of state, which is really unfortunate given our current nursing shortage that is just expected to worsen. Not only will schools lose valuable children, they will also lose their parents, who are deeply involved. My husband is the president of the Clinton Elementary PTO. He helps plan and organize school fundraisers and events. He coaches our kids' sports teams. All this would be gone. Even if we could somehow manage to homeschool our children, they would still be in contact with many of the same kids they go to school with at church, gatherings, playground. The soccer games that my kids could no longer participate in, but they could attend as spectators. UNICEF, the UN Children's Health Agency that advocates and administers vaccines, even opposes vaccine mandates for school. Representative of UNICEF, Marianne Clark Hading, says there is little evidence that mandatory laws improve vaccination coverage. From an infection control standpoint, I'm going to run out of time here, so keeping healthy children out of our school makes no sense when you look at the big picture. In the hospital setting, we put people who have MRSA, which is a contagious antibiotic-resistant staph infection, on contact precautions or isolations. We have to wear gown and gloves when we go in the room to prevent that infection to be spread to other patients. But children with MRSA are allowed to go to school, and I'm not saying they shouldn't. Every child should have access to education, according to the 14th Amendment. Even after MRSA-infected wounds heal, people can remain colonized with the bacteria and then can transmit it to others, including the immunocompromised. The CDC estimates that 1% of the population is colonized with MRSA. All of these There are hundreds of infections that could be detrimental to an immunocompromised person. It's not limited to just the handful that we have vaccines for. Protecting immunocompromised people as an argument for vaccine mandates isn't just illogical, it's also ironic, as the latest research has identified a possible link between vaccines and autoimmune disorders in genetically susceptible population. There's actually an entire textbook on this it's titled Vaccines and Autoimmunity.
Ms.
Running out of
Harrington,
time, I'm
could
going to go right to my last paragraph.
How about your last two sentences, okay?
Sure.
That would be
It might
great.
be tempting to think that the infringement on medical and religious freedom might be justified by the possible public health benefit, but we need to be very cautious about giving or taking away individual freedoms for the greater good. Well-meaning people have fallen victim to this mentality before, as on February 24th, 1920, a charismatic and eloquent politician gave a speech in which he emphasized, and I quote, "the common good before the individual good." And that leader was Adolf Hitler.
Thank you very much, Ms. Harrington. Are there any questions? Dorinda Weeks?
Hello, Senator Millay and members of the committee. I am in opposition to LD 78 and in support to LD 987. My name is Dorinda Weeks. I live in Penobscot County, Newport, Maine. I am kindly requesting your vote to oppose LD 798. The highest law in our land is the U.S. Constitution. The First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution says that everyone in the United States has the right to practice his or her own religion or no religion at all. Our country's forefathers, who were of different religious backgrounds, knew the best way to protect religious liberty was to keep the government out of religion, so they created the First Amendment to guarantee the separation of church and state. I am standing here today to uphold this First Amendment of the United States Constitution. I am standing by to keep the religious exemption for any reason a person feels the importance for, and all the other exemptions. My second reason for opposing is I have seen firsthand the damage that toxins and vaccinations can cause with my family. We have a son who is vaccine injured because he has been tested for low glutathione, but this was after his vaccinations, which was not provided before he was administered vaccinations. So low glutathione means his body does not detox correctly. So the ingredients that were in the vaccinations that were harmful did not come out like they would in our bodies. Because has tests to this day been created for each individual to ensure there will be no damage before administration of vaccinations? If not, I feel the importance of this and that the companies that create the vaccinations should be held responsible for paying for safety testing if they stand this strongly behind their product or serums. Also, are we sure that testing will not be altered? So there again is another question or theory to think about. Vaccination makers should guarantee their product and also need to be held accountable for damaging and murdering. They should not be able to patent a vaccine that can cause damage and murder and not be accountable for that patent. My family has spent thousands of dollars to reverse my son's injuries. At this time, I did not file a vaccine injury because I was unaware of such a report. To this day, he is not fully recovered. I taught my child stranger danger. I consider vaccines to be a stranger in or around my children and grandchildren. Would you put the ones you love in danger with a stranger? I sincerely want to thank you for your time and highly ask you to choose wisely in the best interest of my child and all of Maine's innocent children. They should never be mandated to be vaccinated. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Lindsey Atkinson?
Thank you for allowing me to provide this testimony. My story is not one of trauma or sadness, rather of gratitude. Gratitude that my family lives in a state which allowed us the ability to choose what we thought to be right for our children. After hours of painstaking research and debates, we chose not to vaccinate our children while their immune systems were still developing. After seeing and hearing of all the children today who were injured by vaccines, I have to say I have never felt more convicted in my decision. I want to add that my decision was not made on bad science, and I have to point out that the two states that have some of the strictest vaccine laws in our country, Mississippi and West Virginia, are number 1 and number 12, respectively, in the country's childhood mortality rates. That's on the CDC website. I should hope that Maine would not want to follow suit with those states, and I firmly believe that is not a coincidence. I am here today to speak for my children because I could never forgive myself if I did not speak up against what I believe to be an unjust law. I am a stay-at-home mom to 2 healthy, vibrant children. Our daughter Liberty started kindergarten this past year, and we are so proud to say that she is thriving. She is literally the top reader in her class. She aced her last math test and made friends with ease. Our daughter Liberty is having that quintessential childhood and education that American fairy tales are made of. It's difficult to express in words the joy a mother feels when her kindergartner gets off the bus with excitement all about the wonderful things she did that day. It gives us a great sense of pride in our hometown and our state as well. For various personal reasons, we have chosen not to vaccinate our children. We strongly believe that all medical decisions should be made by a child's parents, and that the government should not infringe upon our right to do so. For all of the reasons we have heard today, I ask that you respect our right to exempt our children from vaccinations. I take my job as a mother very seriously. I use every precaution necessary to keep them healthy and well. I believe LD 798 to be in direct conflict to our constitutional right to life and liberty. We pay taxes to support a school system that includes all children ready and willing to learn. Should this bill pass, Liberty would no longer be able to attend school that she so loves. She would be removed by her friends, teachers, and countless resources, and I would be tasked with the seemingly impossible job to single-handedly provide her the same education that she would have received from a public school. I would lose the ability to earn any income for our family, and our children would lose out on a great many things. I would have to explain to my daughter, though she did nothing wrong, she may no longer attend school with her friends. My children don't deserve this discrimination. I urge you, please consider that when there is risk, there must always be choice. Please vote to oppose LD 798 and retain our parental rights. Please consider our daughter Liberty and my son Thomas and their rights as citizens to attend public school and allow them every opportunity they so deserve. Thank you.
Thank you. Edith Dunham. And then I would invite Julia Dawson, Andrew Fries, Kathryn, Gourlaoue, Gourlaoue, to come up to the front row, please. Please begin.
Hello, Senator Millett and members of the Education and Cultural Affairs Committee. My name is Edith Dunham. I'm from Brooksville, Hancock County, and I'm testifying against LD 798. I've heard a lot of testimony tonight. It's been hours and hours. I want to just point out two things. I think that the most powerful argument I've heard in favor of this bill is that immune-compromised children are at risk for getting a disease, a preventable disease from vaccines. So another thing that I've heard come up a lot tonight is that vaccine injury is not being tracked, and it's true, it's not. There's adverse reactions to vaccines is not being kept track of, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of evidence for that. The HHS in 2006 hired the Harvard Medical School to implement a system that would automatically report adverse events. This is the study. It was done by Harvard Pilgrim Health. They basically created a system for automated reporting for adverse reactions to vaccines because they felt like they were not being adequately reported. Turns out they found out that less than 1% of adverse events are reported to the VAERS system. The reasons for this, barriers to reporting include a lack of clinician awareness, uncertainty about when and what to report, as well as the burdens of reporting. Reporting is not part of a clinician's usual workflow. It takes time and it's duplicative. So they did a study on, they gave 376,000 people vaccines over 3 years, and there were 35,000 possible reactions that could have been reported. That's 10%. They gave this information to HHS, who hired them, who paid them $1 million to do this study. And this is what they wrote in their study. Unfortunately, there was never an opportunity to perform system performance assessments because the necessary CDC contacts were no longer available, and the CDC consultants responsible for receiving data were no longer responsive to our multiple requests to proceed with testing and evaluation. That's page 6 under results. It seems to me that I understand that vaccines are useful, but it seems like there's this scare that if the slightest bit of information comes out against vaccines, there's going to be mass panic. And I feel like the CDC doesn't want there to be anything to come out against it. And I mean, I can understand that, but the transparency is not there. So if they're not recording adverse events, I really don't know how we can compare numbers. So that's it.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Thank you for your testimony. Julia Dawson? Andrew? Priest?
Do
you have copies to give to the committee?
No, I don't have 20. I'll tell you, yeah. Senator Millett and Representative Cornfield and members of the committee. My name is Andrew Fries from Brewer. I have a philosophy degree. I just learned about the hearing yesterday, so I didn't have time to write out a statement, a testimony, so I don't have 20 copies for you. What I do have I have here 26 articles, 85 pages that I have collected. They contain a wealth of information and some of the latest news on vaccines, excuse me, and cover many of the concerns expressed today. And I made this copy for the committee. I would hope it could be seen as a whole, because it covers everything pretty much, rather than separately. And I also would hope the articles would be useful in your work sessions. I've been learning about the vaccine issue for many years. And I just want to tell you a few things about these articles. This one here, and I wondered if the committee had heard about this. This is an open letter to legislators currently considering vaccine legislation from Tatiana, and I don't know how to pronounce her last name, but I think it's Obukanchit. She's a PhD with a PhD in immunology from Harvard. So I think that would be interesting to you. And this one was the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons denounced mandatory vaccines, citing no rigorous safeties. Oh, and this first one here, Harvard immunologist to legislators. Unvaccinated children pose zero risk to any rate. Very interesting article. Biochemical engineer drops bombshell facts about measles and MR vaccine in Washington. Now we all know that Big Pharma has been pushing opioid drugs. In fact, it's come out in the news about this in the state. So what I don't understand, and it's all about money, it's about profit. And here we have all the shots that have been recommended, how few there were in 1983 and how many in 1926. Well, it's about profits. Big Pharma wants more profits, and I understand that they have many vaccines coming in the pipeline for more profits.
Mr. Freeze, we've run out of time. Can you summarize, please, now?
Okay, fine. Yeah, just two more things.
No, I really have to ask you to summarize. It's 2 o'clock in the morning.
Okay,
and
that's
we've got
fine.
other people still waiting.
Yeah, that's fine. It's getting late, and thank you very much. I appreciate you being here so late and letting us stay so late.
Thank you. If you can, feel free to send us an email with any additional information. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Drive safe.
Lee, bring back the advert.
Your water bottle, sir?
No, that's not.
Okay, Kathryn? And then I would invite Mariah, Estes Warren from Westbrook, Ashley Doyle, Ashley Tobias, and Daniel Meyerowitz to come to the front.
Good morning, Senator Millet, and Representative Cornfield, and the distinguished members of the Education and Cultural Affairs Committee. My name is Kathryn Goler. I am part of the ACP Address Confidentiality Program, so my official address is Augusta. But my children go to private school in Freeport. I need to ask you first if I have the permission, the right to express myself because I am French, or if I can speak in behalf of my son, 11 years old, which is American, which is actually a Mainer, and I am from away. Is there any? Yes, okay, so I can speak. Thank you. I appreciate it. So I am in opposition of the LD 798, and I support the LD 987 bill. I have been vaccinated many times and immediately got many health issues all my childhood and life. Scoliosis with corset from 14 to 18 years old, mercury poisonings, beginning of MS, multiple sclerosis. I got rid of, though, of my MS after some chelation of heavy metals with the DMPS in Europe, which here is DMSA, where the clinic of Neukirchen in Germany found the first time 87 micrograms of mercury in my urine. Over 10 micrograms, you are poison. I was having 87 micrograms. It was coming from my mercury fillings, but not only from my vaccines. In the 90s, I personally witnessed the pharmaceutical group SmithKline Bisham testifying the percentage of children who would become disabled, sorry for my accent, disabled and die as a consequences of their vaccine. I was about 25 years old, and I was shocked. I was working at the television at that time as a TV speaker, and I was shocked to hear such thing and started to study the topic. I always thought that the vaccine was safe. And that day, they were informing doctors and journalists that it wasn't. I was also surprised that they wouldn't hide this type of information, that it was normal for them to have a little percentage of death and disabilities. Dr. De Bruer wrote some books about it. He died I think in 2012. Since I have two children, 11 years old and 20 years old. I have my 20 years old here. They had eczema when little, an autoimmune disease, and so they could not be vaccinated. We found mercury in the fecal of my 6-month baby, showing that mercury went through the placenta. So my doctor gave me a prescription. We didn't hear that today, to breastfeed my baby to make sure I provide him my antibodies. I breastfed 2 years for this one, and 3 years of breastfeeding for the other. I learned with that doctor that up to 30 years ago from now, vaccinations were not required for children who has been breastfed, because the mom was providing the necessary antibodies who would protect the child up to his 20 years old.
Ms. Garrett, I need to ask you to summarize. I'm sorry, but
okay.
We've run out of time.
So here is my conclusion. I wish I got more time, because with the language barrier, it's difficult for me to read faster.
I've been keeping everyone to 3 minutes,
yes,
so it's only fair.
That's right. What I would like to say is I am in a very difficult situation. I will have to leave Maine. I wish I could, but I cannot. Because, as you heard, I have an ACP, part of the ACP program. I have been through a PFA, protection from abuse, but the father found the way to have back the 50% of the 50 custody of my child. And what I'm saying here, the problem I'm raising here to my conclusion, is about divorced family. You need to think about divorced family with 50% children, with 50-50 children custody. If one parent is for vaccination and the other is not, the other could lose the custody if he or she wants to leave the state of Maine to avoid the vaccine. And that will be a drama, and that will be unfair.
Okay, thank you very much.